Lisa,
Yes, baby girl.
when I grow up, I want to be a woman to society.
Then so shall you be.
Hey, this is Lisa Landry. Welcome back to A Menace to Society. I'm thrilled today. I'm speaking with an investigative journalist that I just found out about. Please welcome to the podcast, Mike Volpe.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being here. You're working on a lot of very interesting stories. What's poppin'?
I'm sorry, say again?
What do you have that you're working on right now? What kind of stories are you working on?
Wow. Well, I'm waiting on, with the Daily Caller, I have 2 wrongful convictions that they have to edit. One is a murder case. A guy named Kevin Tower was convicted in the mid-1990s, late 1990s. The murder happened in 95, of his 2 uncles. And as you'll see, the evidence has now disintegrated. And the most, I don't know if the most interesting, but an interesting part about the case is she's technically not a nun, but he's got support from a blind woman named Lindy Morelli. She told me she took her vows through the bishops, and it gets complicated, but the same vows, the same commitment, but she has worked on his behalf for the last 5 years. And at this point, the key witness has recanted, and he has an airtight alibi. And that isn't because of her, but it's because of her work that they're able to prove this. And then another guy, Joe Marcy, is in jail right now for molesting his daughter, but his daughter has recanted. And the only reason he's in jail now is this really goofy technicality where a court claims that it wasn't filed in time, the appeal, and it gets very legally complicated, but there is no evidence anymore, because the entire case was his daughter who recanted in a court, and the same judge who originally heard the recantation, and they don't always, if it's probably less than half, maybe less than a quarter of recantations are accepted. And this particular judge did accept the recantation, and then an appeals court claimed that the appeal wasn't filed in time, and Joe is sitting in jail as well. And both of those were brought to me by Lindy, who does a lot of work in prisons, and for a long time she didn't even consider anyone wrongfully convicted. Not that it didn't happen, she just didn't think about it. And she may wind up being very similar to Helen Prejean. If you guys don't know who Helen Prejean is,
Oh, yeah.
She was played by Susan Sarandon. She certainly wants. Now Helen, Sister Helen, I should say. Let me give her the proper respect. Does mostly, if not all, death penalty cases because she's against the death penalty. And Lindy, if you are wrongfully convicted and she can help you, she wants to help you. So Lindy probably wants to do more just in wrongful convictions in general. Kevin gets natural life, which means life without parole. Joe is 20 to 40 years. However, he refuses to admit to the crime, so he's not going to get parole. So it would be the full 40 years unless his sentence is overturned. So those 2, and also I discovered there was a murder by a very violent terrorist of a guy who was an insurance scammer at a black site prison. It's called the Communications Management Unit. It's in Terre Haute, Indiana, and there's 2 of them. And for whatever reason, this guy who was at one point at the Supermax, and I don't know how the Supermax is like the last place. You can't go any worse. You're the worst of the worst. And somehow they moved him to this communications management unit, and he cut the guy's head off. And this other guy was a non-violent offender. So then I recently published a couple of articles about a really bad judge named John Dalton. The Department of Child and Family Services, that's the equivalent of CPS or Child Protective Services in Illinois. And 3 particular cases where this judge, helped out by DCFS, gave custody to suspected child molesters. In all 3 cases where the evidence against them was relatively strong to very strong. In one case, the son of Carol Witkowski was killed or died. We don't know that he was killed yet. Died while in the custody of his father. His son is 2 years old. There was at no point an explanation for how he died. And at this point, the medical examiner has not given like the final answer, but they're leaning towards strangulation. So babies don't strangle themselves. It means an adult strangled the 2-year-old, and he was in the custody of this ex who was credibly accused of, among other things, child molestation as well as raping Kara and possessing child pornography. So,
Okay, wait, Mike, you have so much information. What I'm hearing is that basically Wendy is trying to promote and advocate for men who are wrongfully convicted, and meanwhile there's a judge letting a pedophile kill a baby.
Yeah, you know what? Welcome to the life of an investigative journalist. I don't remember what the story was, but somebody contacted me and said, I have a crazy story. And I said, you know what, I specialize in crazy. So, yeah, no, this is the sort of things that I deal with. Lindy Morelli is her name. And also, she is too modest to ask, but she works at Lighthouse in Scranton. So if folks are listening, you can go look it up online. And if you think that I made her into enough of a saint-type person, feel free to give money to her. None of that goes to me. But, yeah, she since the 80s, late 80s, that is, has been visiting prisons, but for the last 5 to 7 years has been advocating for the wrongfully convicted, and particularly these two guys, Joe Marcy, that's in Pennsylvania, and Kevin Tower is in Michigan. The murder, it was his two uncles, Ron and Paul Tower. It was a really big deal at the time. And it appears what he did, that he definitely did this part, that he took checks, I don't remember which uncle, and started forging checks so he could cash them immediately after the murder. And that's what made him fall under suspicion. And when the article comes out, you'll see he has an airtight alibi because he was watching movies with his sister about 50 miles away from the murder at the time the murder happened. So he wasn't there. Joe, as I said, the accuser, the only witness against him, has recanted. That recantation has been deemed credible by a judge, and he's being held in prison now on this really goofy technicality. So I work on those, and then this other set of articles is about this judge, John Dalton, and how he has a penchant for giving suspected child molesters custody. I found 3, and I should note I did stories on 3 cases. I've talked to about 10 people who are victims, not necessarily where he gave child molester custody. But one guy, Alton Jones, just called him among other things, just tyrannical, where he insulted Alton's mother, who's dead. And at one point, Alton said, I have a son who's in the military. I take care of my kids. And Alton responds with, do all your kids need to be in the military before you pay child support? And a whole bunch of things. This is a very bad judge. He's drunk on power, and he really should be removed. Now, it's a difficult process to remove him, but yeah, on the one hand, I'm writing about people who are wrongfully convicted of very serious crimes, and on the other hand, also talking about judges who ignore very serious crimes in order to give suspected child molesters custody of their kids.
That does happen. That happens a lot, and I'm hearing that a lot, and we're having kids trafficked through CPS in these family court situations by judges like the one you're referencing.
That's absolutely correct. There's a study out of George Washington, Joan Meyer. She did it with another guy, but I don't remember the other guy's name, so I don't want to misquote it. And one of the most powerful parts of the study is that she found that in 0% of the cases when you as the parent make an allegation of child molestation, not necessarily physical abuse, but child molestation, the other parent then turns around and says, I'm not a molester, you are trying to alienate me by coaching the kids. But unless the accused parent admits to it, it's always a form of parental alienation, because the response is always, I didn't do it, you're coaching the kid, because how else would the child come up with this false allegation unless you coach them? So it happens quite a lot, and I think we were going to talk about this concept of parental alienation. It is, first of all, the most interesting thing from my end about parental alienation is you take the most heated debate, let's say abortion or climate change or whatever, or the border, it's like 100 times more intense than all of those debates if you're one of these folks who is involved in family courts. So if you want to lose friends, then you should have a debate on whether or not parental alienation is or is not real and how serious it is and all of those things, because you'll get into fistfights. So in layman's and simplest terms, parental alienation is when during a divorce, one of the parents turns the child or children, however many there are, against the other parent. So that's layman's terms. But the problem for me is that's very broad, that's very nebulous, and that can mean anything. So, if the kids don't like you, it's parental alienation. If the kids are accusing you of some sort of bad thing, that's parental alienation. If you don't see the kids enough, that's parental alienation. If your ex is making fun of you in front of the kids, that's parental alienation. And there's a great... during a news broadcast, there's a woman, Laura Thomas, from the University of Minnesota. She teaches family law. This is what I'm about to tell you. This is the kind of thing you get in her family law class at the University of Minnesota, which isn't cheap. She said if you give the child a toy right before the other parent is supposed to have custody, so let's say you lease her about in like 15 minutes, it's your time with the child, and I'm your ex, and I give the child a toy, and then you show up 15 minutes later. Well, apparently, my giving our child a toy before you get the child is a form of me alienating you from the child, and you'll have to hear her explanation. But this is the kind of goofiness that happens, and it's one reason why when you accuse someone of sexual molestation, why you lose custody, because it's parental alienation, as I say it, it's whatever anybody wants it to be. And it was not created, but it was really popularized by this guy, Richard Gardner, who called it parental alienation syndrome. And we should note it's never been recognized by either the American Psychological Association in their Diagnostic Statisticals Manual, that's the DSM, that's like their Bible, or by the World Health Organization. They have something called the ICD, and I don't remember exactly what the acronym stands for, but neither of those two bodies have ever recognized it, and it's not recognized. You can't argue parental alienation if you're accused of sexual molestation in criminal court. Like if you are charged criminally. In fact, in one of my articles I found there was the New York State District Attorneys Association, I think, who warned all the district attorneys that if they try it, you knock it down because they can't use it, because it has absolutely no scientific or psychological standing. But in family court, here, there, and everywhere, and it's primarily used against women. However, over the last year or two, a lot of activists have brought me more and more cases where it's used against a man. And what I think is happening is devious women are saying, you know what, let me get a piece of this. I'm emotionally abusive, I'm this, that, and the other, and the kids don't like me, and I'm just going to accuse the father of parental alienation. There was recently there were, in the last, say, year, not recently, but in the last year, I've seen four different, there was one done by Vicki Nguyen, who was at the time at NBC, I think in San Francisco, though she's actually gotten a job with the National since then. Chazee Pang, who was at NBC in New York, and then also Trey Bundy, who's at the Center for Investigative Reporting. Those three, I think there's a fourth one, but they were doing about reunification camps, and what those are is if somebody's been deemed a parent alienator, or parent alienated, I should say, so you're like the victim of parental alienation, according to the court, that is. Before you can see the kids, they got to go to this reunification camp because you can't see the kids right away. Somebody else has to make some money. So they actually, in all three of those, they found numerous where the man is the one accused of parental alienation. So I see it more and more where the man is the victim of this false allegation.
Well, you know what I think happens with that. I don't mean to interrupt you. I just you're sharing so much truth. And I guess I'm a little cynical now because I do acknowledge, yes, there are very sick women out there who are abusive and disordered. And this parental alienation syndrome defense has been working for men for the past few decades. And now maybe it's morphing so that the abusive women and their lawyers that they are hiring are using that same tactic in court to their advantage. And at the same time, I think a lot of lawyers are still making so much money off of this bogus theory that they're not willing to let it go.
That's absolutely right. I think that, and look, Gardner was just a woman hater.
Oh, yeah.
I can't
And a
remember the
pedophile.
exact quote,
He was a
but
pedophile.
yeah, and a pedophile. And if you don't believe me, pick up one of his self-published books that no one seemed to notice, where he's talking about things like, oh, pedophilia is not that big a deal, and in many cultures it's fine. So it was, it's exactly what you said. Number one, the minute that the allegation is made, the court is free to do many things, including appoint X, Y, and Z of what I call court professionals, everything from a guardian ad litem, custody evaluator, and they make up terms, parenting coordinator, that's my favorite, parenting coordinator. So
yeah.
you bring in all of these folks to treat it, and of course it's non-existent, so you're treating a non-existent problem, and it's a perpetual custody case at that point. And so, yes, women see it, and you're right, and lawyers see an opportunity. And these court professionals, like these reunification therapists, because again, the minute that it's deemed, you can't just go from the alienator to the alienated. There's a very notorious or famous case out of Michigan, the Simone case, where the judge, Lisa Borsica, accused the kids not only of being alienated, but of acting like Charles Manson. And so they were straight-A students who were absolutely beloved by everyone in their high school, in the custody of their mother, and they were placed with their father. But, of course, no, you can't just go from the mother to the father. We got to send you to this reunification therapist. And the reunification therapist, she wasn't even technically one. Her name is Dorsey Pruder, and the reason she's not technically a reunification therapist is because she's got a high school diploma. She didn't even go to college, let alone grad school. And I know this because she admitted it in a deposition. I broke the story about her not even having a college degree, let alone postgraduate. But she was one of, I don't know how many people they put on the case. The case that I follow with parental alienation at the heart, and I think the most important case with all of this stuff is the Rucky case. So that is David Rucky versus Sandra Rosini Rucky. And if it sounds familiar, you may have seen it on 2020. It was an episode called Footprints in the Snow. And so if you saw Footprints in the Snow, everything I'm about to tell you, you never heard. But that was another one where David Rucky accused his ex-wife of parental alienation because the kids didn't want to see him. Well, why didn't the kids want to see him? Well, let me just go through a few things. Well, according to a CPS report, he stuck a gun to his son's head. According to an audio recording, he made comments about his oldest daughter's breasts. The same audio recording made by that daughter, I should say, he threw one of his, they got 5 kids, one of the younger kids, into a couch and began choking her. The same oldest daughter, her name is Samantha, I should just say her name. She, on her 13th birthday, he chased after her. She barricaded herself in her house. He's got a bar fight, a road rage incident, and my personal favorite is when he swore uncontrollably at 2- and 3-year-olds. And then there's an incident that Samantha talks about in her audio recording where he whips an organ leg off the organ and begins choking his wife in front of all 5 kids, I should say. So apparently it isn't that he put a gun to his son's head. That's not the reason that none of the kids want anything to do with him. Is that his ex-wife was alienating him. Now, here's how crazy and ridiculous parental alienation is. The first person to accuse Sandra Rosini Rucky, and she goes by Sam, so I'll just call her Sam, was a woman named Julie Friedrich, who was the guardian ad litem, another court professional. She was a non-practicing attorney. Now, how exactly is a non-practicing attorney supposed to know that parental alienation exists? I do not know. I've asked Julie Friedrich. She won't answer it. She was told to see a guy named Paul Reitman, who is I call him a quack, but he's at least therapist or a psychiatrist. He sees her for less than 30 minutes. The way she described it, 4 or 5 kids were there. Nico, that's the oldest. That's the one who had, according to the CPS report at least, a gun to his head when he was 8 years old. He wasn't there. He asked each of the kids one question, then they leave, and then he claims that the situation is so serious she must be removed. And he actually said they needed some sort of like therapeutic foster care to deprogram, and that's another thing. So basically, you remember with the Simone kids, they're like Charles Manson. It's just like they're like cult-like. So you have to deprogram them. But in reality, what you're actually doing to the kids is you're trying to get rid of the memories they have of the parent being violent and replace them with false memories. It's ironic in a really twisted sort of a way.
It's a sick with it's really sick. Yeah, they're making these kids disassociate and not trust reality. They're setting these kids up for failure.
They're setting these kids up to somehow be able to function in the abuser's hands by making them believe the abuser is not an abuser. Not all of the reunification therapy works like this, but the one that the Rucky girls, and I'll tell you when they went to them, the one that the Rucky girls went to, my understanding is this is how they work. So here's how at least this one works, and it works something like this. Your father loves you, and your mother's putting these thoughts in your head, and until you tell me your father loves you, your mother's putting these thoughts in your head, I'm not letting you leave. So, I talked to one mother and her son, well, if that's what it takes, I didn't say this out loud. He's like, you're right, I'm sorry. My father does love me, and my mother was putting these thoughts in my head. Can I leave now? And, so this is the fight or flight instinct that kicks in for kids. In the Rucky case, they all begged for a while. Nico eventually sided with his father. There's therapist notes that say that only started the minute his father bought him a car. My understanding is just about everything Nico now owns was bought by his father. So he was bought off. But all of the kids begged to live with their mother. And I told you about Reitman. Shortly after that, Reitman's report comes out on September 5, 2012. On September 7th, the judge, and I should definitely mention the judge's name, David Knudsen, he orders Sam, the mother, out of her home where she'd lived for 15, 20 years, gives her 3 hours. And according to the court order, he issues the court order at 9 a.m. and he says, you must leave the home by noon. Correct. Yes, he gave her 3 hours. And by the way, this was based on what he called a telephonic conference because it wasn't actually a hearing. Her attorney knew this was coming and didn't tell her until 9 a.m. September 7th. I think her attorneys, she had a couple. I don't want to misquote which one did this to her, but let's just say the attorney did not do a good job on Sam's behalf. So
no, a lot of these lawyers, they protect their friends and they protect their careers. They don't actually advocate for the child who's being harmed or the parent who's retained them. I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to make that clear to listeners. Yeah. These lawyers do not work for you. They are not advocating for justice. They are letting these judges break federal law and state laws.
You're absolutely right. I have a friend named Fletcher Long who used to be a very good criminal defense attorney, and he calls it not crapping where I eat. Mm-hmm. You don't want to tick off the judge. You don't want to get the opposite attorney mad because you're working with them all the time and your client. Well, I'm going to see you once for this case, and then I'm gone. So you're absolutely right. And Sam absolutely had a bunch of terrible attorneys. Her last, Michelle McDonald, I wrote a book with her. Though I try not to allow that to bias me, was much better. And I should mention, Michelle did take $5,000 from Sam, even though she had no money, but worked for her for about 5 years for $5,000, which, anything about attorneys, that's very little. She did a pretty good job for her, but generally, you're right. Her attorneys did not help her. But her kids come home on September 7th expecting their mother to be there. Go figure, because their mother's there all the time. She's not there. 4 of them, I believe, run to the police station. They're actually placed with their maternal aunt, meaning Sam's sister. And then on April 19th, the 2 oldest girls were taken to a police station and tricked because their aunt told them, and their aunt set this up. they told them we're going for pizza, but let's stop. I'm just going to make one stop. The stop was the police station, and then they were told they were going to live with their initially with their paternal aunt, and then transitioning to their father, and then they ran. They were taken to the family home, and then as soon by police escort, and then as soon as the police left, not as soon, but say like 20, 30 minutes after that, they ran. And this is what happens because people like this Judge Knudsen and Paul Reichman and Julie Friedrich, and there was an alphabet soup of these court professionals in this case, all making obscene amounts of money because they want to pretend like the abuse isn't real, and then they force kids into these abusive situations, and sometimes the worst thing happens where the kids just run. And the story is long and complex, but eventually what happened on April 19th was their mother became so poor she didn't even have a permanent cell phone. So what the girls did was they started calling everyone she knew until they called someone who was with her, a guy named Dale Nathan, and then they found their mother. And I wasn't there, but according to their mother, what her daughter Samantha said to her is, "We're running with or without you." So their mother was put into an impossible situation. So she picked them up, took them to a woman named Eva Vold, who was a court activist. And Eva Vold, after interviewing the girls without their mother present, the way I understand it, she walked out and said, "This is worse than I thought." So you can only imagine what these girls told Eva Vold. They were taken to a horse farm for abused children where they stayed with Doug and Gina Dallin, and these two they housed abused children. So according to them, the girls were abused. According to their mother, everyone but the court and the cops believed that and the media believed that they were abused. What to me, there's a lot of stories that are similar to this. Most of them don't end up with the kids running. But what really separates this from the other ones is what the media did to this, which is not only a smear campaign, but it was coordinated. I'm not sure exactly who coordinated it, but you can see the coordination. And often it was between the police and the media. Central in it is this guy, Michael Broadcorp, who used to be a political operative who was... at one point, he had an affair with his boss when he was like a communications director. With his boss, meaning this woman, Amy Koch, who was a top state legislator. So he lost his job. He matriculates to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. He does a political blog. And then suddenly he discovers the Rucky case. All he does is write about the Rucky case. And you can find him online. He's got a website called Missing in Minnesota where all he does is smear Sam, her friends, once in a while me. Now he's going after Michelle McDonald, her last attorney, and particularly 2020. What 2020 did is they just pretended that the evidence of abuse that was given to them was not given to them. And Elizabeth Vargas, who now does cults for A&E, which I'm sure was her career plan, I remember the most devious thing she did is at one point she said, "You promised that there was evidence of abuse. We could find none of it." Now remember, there's a CPS report of the father sticking a gun to the kids.
Right.
There's an audio recording of the girl saying that he makes comments about her breast, that he's choking one of her sisters. There's a police report where there's that he grabs an organ leg and starts choking her. And that police report is actually about another incident, and Sam mentioned it, but mentioned this. The other incident is he, meaning David Rucky, was choking his then recently ex-wife, and her friend witnessed it. And they were given her friend's name and phone number, and if they interviewed her, it wound up on the cutting room floor. So this is how badly they manipulated things. But the other way that they manipulated is they asked her, "Are there any police reports of physical abuse from during your marriage?" There aren't any, but if you know anything about domestic violence, you know that rarely happens. And by the way, and I say this almost every time, if that question was asked of Tina Turner about her marriage to Ike, the honest answer is no. Tina never called the cops, not once. Does that mean Ike didn't beat Tina? Do you think that Elizabeth Vargas would have the gall to accuse Tina Turner of making up her abuse by Ike? I don't think so. So why ask the question that way? I don't know, but they manipulated it. They made it seem like she was making it up. And they interviewed Sam while she was in jail, because eventually after the girls, in fact, before the girls were found, she was detained, but they interviewed her while she was in jail. So they make her look like a criminal. They make the dad look like he's great. And they interviewed Nico, the guy who had the gun stuck to his head when he was 8 years old, at least according to a CPS report. And at that point, he claimed he'd never seen his father be violent. And once again, there's actually therapist notes that say that this all started the minute that his father bought him a car. The CPS report was not used to challenge his credibility. Neither was this therapist notes, which they may not have had. But 2020 manipulated this case to make it look like David Rucky, who is a vicious, violent man, and by the way, he's got police reports in 3 counties, which is difficult to do. It made it look like he's innocent. His kid backs him up, and so obviously this mom was making things up. And they set domestic violence back 20, 30, 50 years, and they made it seem like it's easy to manipulate kids so that they talk about abuse that isn't real when it's impossible. Well, not impossible. I'm sure it happens, but it's very rare. Most kids won't talk about abuse that actually does happen. How often the kids talk about abuse that's not happening? Mm-hmm. Completely ridiculous. And so they set things back. Sandra Gazzini Rucky is now a 6-time felon. She's homeless, she's jobless, and she's smeared. And the worst part is her father, who's dead now, was the original investor in Medtronic. So she was actually a trust fund baby. So there was absolutely no reason for her to ever wind up either being homeless, not jobless, but ever be in any financial troubles, because she had a trust fund, which is now in the hands of her ex-husband. And people like Michael Broadcorp and Minneapolis Star Tribune did a lot on it. I'll give you a great example of how the media plays this. There's a radio station in Minnesota called KQRS, and they're like afternoon guy. I think his name is Tom Barnard. He interviewed Michael Broadcorp and his writing partner, Allison Mann. Allison Mann doubles as the, I think, clerk or paralegal for Lisa Elliott, who is David Rucky's attorney. So Michael Broadcorp, now look, I wrote a book with Sam's attorney, but Michael Broadcorp's writing partner is a paralegal for David Rucky's attorney. So obviously it's a very objective and unbiased book that he wrote. But so he interviews them about the book that they wrote about this case. And if I remembered it, I might say it, but I don't remember the name of the book. But so I find out about this. I call KQRS, and I'm like, you need to have me on because this is lies and all of these things. And they look into it, and it turned out Barnard interviewed him on his podcast and not on KQRS. And so they said, no, we don't need to interview you. That's on his podcast. Now, keep in mind, they never once said that wasn't lies. They didn't say this is a complicated matter. They just said, since it was on his podcast, we don't care that our afternoon personality, that we don't care that he put this liar on, and we don't feel any duty to correct the lies that our afternoon personality allowed on his podcast. And I'll give you another example. Soon after Sam was removed from her home, David Rucky then moved in, and since then, so that's 2012. This is according to the track search. The home has been foreclosed on 6 times, and yet he somehow still owns it. So involved in all of the mortgage stuff, there's stuff that like Lisa Elliott, her name is on, not mortgages, but she's in the middle of it. So she was made Lawyer of the Year by Minnesota Lawyer, which is a lot of states have trade journals for lawyers. And so that's the Minnesota Lawyers Weekly, I think they call it. But Minnesota Lawyer. So the publisher is Bill Geyer, and I call this guy up, and I'm screaming at him. And I said, she's involved in fraud, and you being her Lawyer of the Year, and how dare you? And he goes, fraud? Send me everything. And so I send him what I have, and he calls me back. He goes, you know what? I'm not even looking at it because she won. This is the kind of stuff that they have. He doesn't care. He doesn't even want to know if the woman is involved in fraud. This is how far they go, all of them, to protect this guy, David Rucky. And for the life of me, I do not understand why. But this is what the media has done. And that's not the main reason, but one of the reasons why I think that case is more important than the rest is because of the smear campaign that they have done on this woman. And that's the only way you can convince anyone that David Rucky's a good guy, is by smearing her. And somehow everyone from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune in 2020 has been able to do it. Though more recently, I think that the truth is coming out. However, the courts still have it so that she's jobless and homeless and he got everything. She's still a 6-time felon, and this is really going to take a federal investigation because there was all sorts of crimes committed by David Rucky. Look, if you have your house foreclosed on 6 times and you keep it, I'm not sure exactly what crime he committed, but there's no way everything was kosher and legal. He owns multiple homes, multiple cars, and a multi-million-dollar business, but he somehow qualifies for Minnesota Care, which is a food program for people with low income. This is the kind of fraud that he's engaged in, and it seems to be okay with everyone. Nobody cares. So it'll require either the FBI, and multiple times the Minneapolis field office has been called, and they don't do anything. And so between the smear campaign and the level of corruption that I've seen, that's what makes the case stand out. But in terms of the techniques of flipping around allegations of abuse, it is very similar to millions, I would say, stories just in the U.S. And I see a lot of stories about PAS and Parental Alienation being used all around the country. There's a huge debate right now in Australia about parental alienation. So this term is used all over the place, and it's in my opinion, one of the most destructive term in family court, certainly. And it places kids in the hands of abusers because abusers have a ready-made answer to any allegation of abuse.
Thank you so much, Mike Volpe. You are a wealth of information. Y'all find him on Twitter at Mike Volpe. Stay in touch, get connected, and also please do join me at my YouTube channel. Subscribe, it's free, and you will know when each new podcast drops every Womanist Wednesday. Shout out, Ari. I love you, sweetheart.